Hello everyone, I hope you're enjoying the new map, I certainly am. Today I've got for you something quite different from the stuff I usually build. I decided to go for pure fantasy and just have some fun with the new tile set. So, here it is, the Shipwreck Cove, a hidden pirate's den on the Isle of Siptah. So, I found this really nice secluded cove on the southern shore of the island that's surrounded by cliffs on all sides and has just this narrow ledge to build on. There's even a tiny cave here, which I'm going to use for my home. The basic idea is to build the whole base using parts of shipwrecks thrown onto the rocks. I know this is not really realistic, but I don't care. I just want a fantasy pirate town. I'll be using mostly the flotsam tileset, but since it doesn't really work on its own, I'm going to supplement it with insulated wooden parts. The biggest challenge in this one is to properly show damage and passage of time. To deal with the first issue, I'm using various support beams from glass constructions and more to create a somewhat chaotic mess of timbers protruding from the hull, so that it looks as if the ship was broken rather than cut cleanly in half. One thing I keep in mind is to place them as extensions of the lines previously established by the foundations, so that none extend beyond the hull lines, and try to maintain symmetry to some degree, so that the gaps indicate where parts have fallen off. Age of Sail warships are kinda complicated, so I've decided to simplify things a bit and adapted them to fit the terrain. So I've decided to build quarterdeck as a part of the weather deck, so that the cabin doors line up with the entrance to the cave. The roof of the cabin forms the poop deck, which I extended forward a bit with the wedge tiles to provide some cover for the ship's wheel. Poop deck as a nautical term actually has its origin in Latin, pupis, the aft end of the ship, and was introduced to English via French. Toilets were on the opposite end of the ship and were called heads. I know, it's a mess. Since I have more or less half of the hull, I've chosen to give it mainmast, just for the gratings, and mizzenmast on the poop deck, thus making it a ketch, which feels appropriate for a pirate vessel to me, as I greatly enjoyed playing Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and it reminds me of Jackdaw. I know the game refers to it as brig all the time, but this is actually wrong. A brig is two-masted, square-rigged vessel carrying main and foremast. It's quite easy to tell them apart, as both fore and mizzenmasts are always shorter than mainmast. Also, Jackdaw carried mortars as part of her armament, and ketch was preferred type for this role, as the lack of foremast meant a lot of space in the front part of the vessel for mortars. Still, there are some other problems with her. The masts are way too far forward, and the sail plan doesn't make sense. If you're curious what a historically accurate Jackdaw would look like, look up La Candelaria, a beautiful 18th century Spanish bomb ketch. As for the deck details, I've combined ship's wheel and binnacle into one object, due to limited space, and used khitan table and some ropes to mimic fife rail, a wooden support holding belaying pins to which running rigging is secured. The various ropes on the ship are part of standing or running rigging. The first one is static and used to support and stabilize parts of the ship, for example the shrouds, connecting masts to the hull. Running rigging contains all the ropes used to operate sails. They are very easy to tell apart, as the standing rigging was tarred for weatherproofing, while the ropes of the running rigging were left in their natural, rather light color. Time is a tricky thing to incorporate in a static building. What I like to do is to create a starting point, then consider how it's changed by various forces acting upon it as time passes. What I'm building in the end is a snapshot, a single moment from the building's timeline. In this case, my starting point is a ship that got tossed onto the cliff and broke in half. How it ended up there? Huge storm, magic, whatever. I don't really care. Important thing is what happened later. It's in an awkward position, exposed to the elements, but also still inhabited. So the main factors I should consider are the fundamental physical forces, nature, and human interaction. Wind, rain and gravity already took their toll on the ship, as evidenced by the broken timbers, yet some remained strong enough to be adapted to a new role. So I've built an elevator in between them and added some planks and ladders so it can be reached from the deck. Nature inevitably reclaims all abandoned structures, so I've placed a lot of hanging vines around the ship, focusing mostly on the broken part, but also on the less used parts. This is also a perfect opportunity to add some color, as this place is kinda bleak. Vivid lush green of the vines allows me to change the mood of the place, breaking away from the dull palette of the environment and giving the ghost ship feel to it, and replacing the depressing atmosphere with a much more inviting mystery vibe. This is further enhanced by the lights I've placed around. Their saturated warm yellow tone brings out the richness of the green and warmth of the wood, while at the same time their radius is very limited so that they are not overpowering. Proper lighting is key to making a location. Its role is never to simply increase brightness, rather it is there to outline, enhance, draw attention, create mood and cast shadows. It is an extremely important and powerful tool, yet when used correctly, it's almost imperceptible. The doors on the ship lead to this little cave, which will serve as my bedroom. Since it's a pirate captain's quarters, treasure is a must, so I've placed a lot of it around the bed, starting with stacks of gold and silver bars, then filling the gaps and empty patches with smaller items like goblets and coin pouches. Then I added coins and rings in between. This actually creates an issue, as personal quarters are an important part of the character building, and most important aspect of any good character is relatability. Since most of us aren't filthy rich, presenting character as such might render him unlikable, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Character's relation to wealth is much more important. Hence the treasures are scattered around the floor in the darker parts of the cave, so that I can redirect attention away from them. Longing for travel and adventure is represented by the maps, honest, down-to-earth nature by simple food and utensils, while artistic, romantic soul is evidenced by the loot laying on the bed. Basically, as long as viewers, readers or players, depending on the medium through which the story is told, can relate to characters' passions, dreams, achievements, but also failures and misery, wealth is not an issue. Easiest way to think about this: consider Batman or Harry Potter. My primary design goal for this base is to facilitate role-playing, so I've decided to leave the deck as it is, so that it may serve as gathering area for special occasions. Charisma is mandatory personal trait for every good captain, and with this empty deck, it's easy to imagine him standing on the poop deck addressing his crew gathered below. Also, I didn't want to add any gameplay related clutter there, so that the area is easily recognizable as a part of a ship. This of course means that all my crafting stations had to be placed elsewhere. Fortunately, there's still a lot of room on this ledge. The crafting stations also provide a glimpse into the life of a camp. A broken wreck surrounded by workbenches suggests that there's some work going on, parts of the wreck being stripped for materials, while others, still sturdy enough to be used, are reinforced. This is again a way to incorporate time aspect into the building process. Artisans and carpenters' workbenches being placed by the wreck imply an ongoing effort, a change, while the blacksmith shop has its own crude shack that's far less ship-like, showing how the raw materials salvaged from the wrecks have been reused. As far as aesthetics are concerned, I'm trying to continue in the same manner as before, using lights and vegetation to make the area more prominent and differentiated from the environment. I am reusing same lanterns and vines, as this will give the whole base a degree of uniformity, while different building designs will provide adequate variety. Since this whole base is basically just me playing with a simple design idea, and trying to create unique variations of it, I'm making another shipwreck, on the very narrow part of the ledge to the right. This one though will be almost completely broken, so that some of the grass remain visible, as this adds some color variation. I've started with beams anchored to the cliff, and the created mangled side of the hull. Also, this skeletal structure makes the wreck more interesting when seen from below, as opposed to using roofs or ramps. The beams, even though straight, leave a lot to imagination, so they don't seem to immediately clash with our expectations of how ship's hull should look like. While sloped flat tiles are perceived more as an exterior of the hull, which creates this uncanny valley-like effect since hull should be curved. I want to add some verticality to the outpost, so that it's not just a single boring line of structures. So I've used the mast of this wreck as a support for rope bridges anchored to the cliffs with treehouse foundations, and created an elevated lookout post. Among the clutter I've placed some more crafting stations, stove, large campfire and fermentation barrels, and of course decorated the area of wines and lanterns to visually blend it with the rest of the base. Next, I've added a couple of trees on the small ledge above the cave and around the lookout post. Their color matches vibrant green of the vines I've used all around the base, which visually unifies the area and creates contrast with the cliff. This combined with the movement of branches adds some nice ambience to the area. I've also created a small observation deck and hid a couple of beehives and dryers under the trees behind it. That's one part done. Now let's move on to the other end of vertical axis. I've already placed a small platform below as a base for the elevator, so now I'm simply extending it to create a small dock. Please notice the item in slot number 3 on the action bar. That's pillar snap point extension from Glass Constructions and More, which allows me to place pillars on the foundation's corners. My full mod list is as always in the description, though it's a bit smaller now as I had to remove some that were not updated for the new expansion. A similar effect can be achieved without mods, using stairs. Also, you can simply place pillars in their default position, for a slightly different look. To keep the theme consistent, I'm also making the docks look like adapted shipwrecks. First one is perpendicular to the shore, so that its mizzenmast top can be connected to the second level of the base. The ground has a quite steep angle here, which is perfect as it gives the cabin this appropriate half-buried look. The door sadly leads nowhere. It would be so cool to add interior here. Wish Funcom could give us an option for loading doors and ability to create small interior cells. In case you don't know, loading door basically doesn't open but teleports players to another map. Just think of interiors in Skyrim, for example. Anyway, the protruding deck of the ship forms a small jetty where I've put all my fishing gear. Pirates have to eat after all. The second one I've decided to flip upside down, using flotsam sloped walls to indicate hull shape, as they are curved slightly. I've only used gratings for the floor to clearly differentiate this area from the ship decks, as the whole platform would be constructed rather than adapted from existing structure. As for decorations, I've created a small living space on the upper part of the first ship, the tent, hammock and lantern all providing some color variation to this otherwise monotone area. The second ship became a small tavern. It's a fantasy pirate's den, to hell with health and safety. Get off the boat and straight to the pub. The ledge upon which I've built does not run continuously around the whole cove. That's perfect, as I was pretty much looking for any excuse to add more elevators anyway. I first placed a line of temporary foundations along the cliff, so that both landings line up, then added horizontal elevator to connect them. I could simply leave it as is, but where's the fun in that? So I've decided to make it all look like a broken ship, bow and stern still standing on the cliff, while the elevator rides through the missing middle part. This whole base is basically a design exercise, one that I would very much encourage you to do. Take a simple basic design, Then create as many variations of it as you can. For example, take a simple tower. How would it change if it's a guard tower? Or maybe a wizard's tower? How about a lighthouse sitting on a lonely rock surrounded by stormy sea? Or consider a village full of wooden houses with gabled roofs. Blacksmith's home would certainly look different than a pub, even though all the major elements of the buildings are the same. In my case, I'm just making nearly identical shuttered racks, and their individual features are derived from their functions. By using the same elements over and over again, I'm forcing myself to adapt to the basic function and context, which is different for each building. One benefit of this method is organically created coherence of the whole location, which I'm also actively promoting by using unifying elements, like in this case, vegetation. The objective is to create balance between similar and individual, so that each singular building feels unique, but also a part of the set. That's just theory, of course, but how does it look in practice? Consider the beams. I'm only using 3 in this whole base: diagonal, horizontal and frame. Their basic function is to replace regular walls and floors, in order to show damage sustained by the vessel. By merely varying which parts are still in good condition and which have been damaged, I can already introduce a lot of variety. This, combined with the exact location of the building, gives me an opportunity to show the same part from different angles, which allows for even greater variation. Consider the first rack I've built here. Its stern is mostly intact and presented from the front. The first lift platform I've built just moments ago is also stern, but presented from the other side. Its rear wall is mostly complete, while the front, where doors and stairs were on the first one, is missing, and replaced partially by the beams. I can also use those 3 beams to indicate the shape of the parts that are otherwise awkward to build. On the second lift platform, I've built the ship's bow that way. They also help greatly in creating a unified look of the whole base, as they are perfect attach points for the various vines I've placed around. On a larger scale, I can simply decide which parts of the ship I want to build and which to omit. Previous wrecks all had decks with parts of either bow or stern added, while this one is the opposite. Deck is completely missing. The elevator's rope is the only connection between the bow and stern, indicating that they were once parts of a larger structure. I know I've said this was a fun, stupid fantasy build. I'm sorry guys, I lied. It's large and complicated. Truth be told, I just wanted a cozy little home using the cave and a bit of shipwreck outside, but then I started adding to it and it kinda grew into this. On to the next ship then. This one will actually have a complete deck, while both bow and stern are partially missing. I've only dedicated a small room in the forecastle for living quarters. This is not really a town, rather a place to rest and enjoy the spoils of high seas adventures, while performing maintenance and repairs on the ships. So the crew would actually live aboard most of the time anyway. I've decided to make another tavern here, a bit bigger than the first one. I mean, come on, it's a pirate's den, a place where rum should never be gone. To make the stern more interesting, I've decided to give it different floor plans to each of its 2 levels. The top one resembling that of a ship, while the lower is in part broken and missing a wall. It would be nice to get some grub to munch in between drinking and singing shanties, so the lower part of the stern will be a kitchen, providing much needed sustenance for the pirates and a perfect excuse to place some crafting stations. The fenced area will be a pig pen, a mandatory element of any proper pirate tavern. After all, where else would you recruit a trusty quartermaster for your next grand adventure? I've finished the area off camera. It's just simple clutter, basic doorway blocking access from outside, and 2 simple masts with their fighting tops serving as a support for stairs connecting the tavern to the shore below. Since there was a bit more space on this part of the ledge, I've added some clutter in between the trees as well, creating some more areas for role-playing. Sitting by a campfire, gazing at the distant horizon is more of my thing. I mean, a pirate tavern sounds like a really fun place, but I don't really like crowds. Speaking of crowds, adding NPCs to a place like this could be a really cool thing to do, but keep in mind that they limit role-playing potential to some degree. Every role filled by an NPC is a role that a player won't be able to take. So for now I've left this place empty. If you'd like to learn how to add them, check out my video on thespians. Anyway, I'm off to tinker a bit with Stormglass. I hope you enjoyed the video. Cheers!